Venice did not become rich by accident, it became rich by design. For centuries, this city ran one of the most reliable economic systems the world had ever seen. Goods moved, contracts held, wealth accumulated. Crisis stayed rare. To people living at the time, Venice did not look like a society still figuring things out. It looked finished, solved, and systems that feel finished tend to behave very differently from systems that still expect to change. Venice should not have worked. It had no farmland to feed itself, no mines to fund itself, no large territory to fall back on. It sat on marshes, surrounded by shallow water, but that weakness became its first advantage. The water kept armies out, and the sea kept trade flowing in. What looked like isolation became access. Early on, Venice made a narrow choice. It would not try to dominate land, it would dominate movement. Spices from the eastern Mediterranean, timber from the Adriatic, luxury goods moving west, Venice placed itself in between. Trade, however, is unstable by nature. Ships sink, prices move, partners fail. Most merchants lived with constant uncertainty. Venice tried to reduce that uncertainty as much as possible. Shipping seasons were scheduled, routes were standardized, legal rules were clear and consistent. Merchants did not need to guess when ships would sail or how disputes would be resolved. Risk didn't disappear, but it became manageable. That predictability attracted capital, but predictability also changed behavior. Merchants adapted to the system. Expectations narrowed. Success began to depend on the rules staying the same. At first, that felt like security. The clearest expression of this logic was the Venetian Arsenal. This was not just a shipyard. It was organization turned into architecture. Ships were built in stages. Parts were standardized. Labor was divided into repeatable tasks. Galleys moved through the arsenal continuously. Hulls, masts, sails, rigging, each step predictable. The result was speed. Venice could build fleets faster than rivals. It could replace losses without improvisation. Naval power became routine rather than heroic. That routine mattered. Trade routes felt safer. Insurance costs fell. Confidence rose. Lower uncertainty meant lower costs. Lower costs meant higher margins. And higher margins encouraged the system to repeat itself again and again in the same way. It worked brilliantly. As long as the world asked for the same kind of ships, the same kind of routes, the same kind of trade, Venice applied the same logic to politics. Wealthy cities often destroy themselves from the inside, factionalism. Civil war, sudden rulers. Venice tried to remove those risks too. Power rested with merchant families whose fortunes depended on long-term trade. Stability was not an ideal. It was a financial interest, so politics was slowed down. Authority was fragmented across councils. The Doge was constrained. No single individual could easily force radical change. This was not indecision, it was insurance. The Serrata formalized this structure, fixing political power inside a closed elite. From within the system, this felt reassuring. Trust became institutional. Continuity became policy. Law reinforced it. Contracts were enforced quickly. Records were meticulous. Coinage was reliable. Credit circulated because people believed the future would resemble the past. Even expansion followed strict logic. Venice secured ports and routes that supported existing trade. It did not chase unknown opportunities. It reinforced what already worked. For centuries, the results justified the caution. Wealth accumulated. Shocks were absorbed. The system endured, but endurance can quietly turn into expectation. And when a system becomes optimized for a world it understands, the greatest risk is not collapse, but a change it cannot slow, block, or vote against. Venice's system did not just produce wealth. It selected for a certain kind of behavior. Success acted like a filter. Merchants who thrived were those who fit the system. Standardized ships, scheduled convoys, approved routes. Those who relied on sudden opportunity, an unexpected cargo, a new route, a risky timing advantage, found fewer places to operate. Imagine a trader who spots a temporary shortage, a narrow window where speed matters more than scale. Venice's system does not stop him outright. It simply offers no support, no convoy slot, no insurance, no legal clarity. The opportunity exists. The system does not. This was not an accident. It was a feature. Efficiency rewarded scale. Scale favored incumbents. Incumbents shaped the rules. Innovation was allowed, but only if it could be standardized, insured, scheduled, and absorbed. Over time, Venice became less a place where new possibilities were discovered and more a place where known flows were optimized. At first, this felt like discipline. Later, it quietly narrowed the future. Venice believed it had tamed uncertainty. In reality, it had relocated it. By concentrating trade into predictable routes and schedules, Venice made commerce smoother when conditions behaved as expected. But the system also became tightly coupled. A delayed convoy was not just one ship running late. It disrupted calendars, tightened credit, filled warehouses, strained contracts. Problems traveled quickly because everything was synchronized. This was the trade-off. The system handled familiar risks extremely well: storms, piracy, seasonal delays. These were priced, insured, and managed. What it struggled with were unfamiliar disruptions, events that did not fit historical patterns. Insurance was based on the past. Contracts assumed regularity. Institutions expected repetition. Venice reduced volatility in the short term by increasing exposure in the long term. It worked until disruption no longer arrived in familiar forms. The same logic governed politics. The Serrata stabilized Venice by fixing power within a closed elite. This reduced conflict. It also fixed perspective. Political legitimacy became tied to continuity rather than performance. New families struggled to enter. New ideas struggled to find patrons. No one inside the system benefited from imagining a radically different future. This was not corruption. It was alignment. Merchants in power designed policy to protect existing trade. Officials were rewarded for preserving order, not for questioning assumptions. Stability became the highest value. Venice did not lack intelligence. It lacked incentives to think differently. And over time, the ability to imagine alternatives weakened, not culturally, but structurally. Venice's wealth depended on a specific configuration of the world: maritime trade between East and West. Established routes through the Eastern Mediterranean, commercial centers that had existed for centuries. Venice organized itself perfectly for that environment, but that environment was not fixed. Power on land consolidated. Sea routes faced new pressures. Economic gravity began to shift away from familiar centers toward emerging edges. Venice was deeply invested in a world it did not control, one where the old routes mattered more than new ones, and where experience counted more than flexibility. Adaptation was possible, but only within the system's existing logic. That logic was becoming outdated. None of these costs were obvious at the time. The economy was still profitable. The state was still stable. The institutions still functioned, which made the trade-offs easy to ignore. Efficiency narrowed options. Predictability concentrated risk. Stability slowed response. Venice had not made mistakes. It had made choices. Those choices only worked in a world that rewarded repetition, continuity, and control, a world that was beginning to disappear. Venice was about to face a world that rewarded exactly what it had trained itself not to do. Venice did not freeze. It hardened, slowly at first, almost invisibly. The routines that once reduced risk became expectations. Trade followed familiar paths. Ships followed approved designs. Decisions followed precedent. This was manageable until time itself became a constraint. Others were already moving. New actors experimented. New strategies emerged. Venice noticed, but it processed change the way it always had. Carefully, deliberately, through institutions designed to prevent mistakes. Change was not blocked, it was slowed, and delay compounds. Venice's institutions had been built to prevent rash decisions. Now they prevented fast ones. Each cautious step widened the gap between recognizing change and responding to it. At first, the cost of hesitation was small, then it accumulated. When pressure increased, Venice adapted methodically. Convoys were adjusted. Contracts refined, costs renegotiated. These responses were rational. They were also limited. Every adjustment assumed the same underlying structure: established routes, familiar markets, known centers of exchange. Venice was solving yesterday's optimization problem more efficiently each year. Meanwhile, others were playing a different game. Power was shifting toward territorial control, scale beyond convoys, and strategies that did not rely on Venetian coordination. Venice was managing flows while competitors were redefining where flows mattered. Adaptation became technical rather than strategic. The box did not feel small until alternatives began to outperform it. Political rigidity now did more than narrow vision. It began to defend itself. The ruling elite's wealth, legitimacy, and identity were tied to the existing system. Proposals that challenged foundational assumptions did not just seem risky, they seemed illegitimate. Not wrong, out of bounds. The system filtered ideas the same way it filtered merchants. Anything that threatened continuity struggled to survive long enough to be tested. No one was rewarded for imagining a different Venice. Some were penalized for trying. This was not stagnation by ignorance. It was stagnation by design. The system no longer just resisted change. It protected itself from it. As power shifted in the Eastern Mediterranean, Venice encountered limits it could not legislate away or optimize around. Its system had been built to manage risk, not to renegotiate the structure of the world. The rise of the Ottoman Empire altered the balance of trade, not by ending exchange, but by redefining its terms. Access remained, but leverage did not. costs rose, negotiation replaced advantage. Venice responded rationally. Treaties, payments, diplomacy, trade continued, but rule-setting power moved elsewhere. Venice was no longer shaping the conditions of exchange. It was operating within them. Predictability, once the city's greatest strength, now stabilized arrangements that benefited others more than itself. Each accommodation preserved commerce in the short term. Each one also reduced the range of choices available in the long term. Venice could manage pressure, it could not remove it. And with every compromise, the space for independent action narrowed further. By now, Venice was still wealthy, but constrained. Its institutions excelled at defending what existed. They struggled with what did not yet fit. Stability, once its greatest asset, had become friction. Flexibility requires slack. Venice had eliminated slack. Speed requires authority. Venice had dispersed it. Risk-taking requires upside. Venice had optimized for preservation. None of this looked like failure. From inside the system, it still looked like wisdom, like experience, like restraint. But endurance was no longer the challenge. The challenge was responding to a world that no longer rewarded what Venice was built to do. And as the window for choice narrowed, Venice faced a problem no amount of careful management could solve, because the kind of change now required was the one its system was least able to make. Venice did not collapse. There was no decisive defeat, no sudden impoverishment, no moment when the system visibly broke. That absence is the point. Venice remained wealthy long after it stopped being central. Ships still sailed, markets still cleared. Institutions continued to function exactly as designed, but relevance had quietly moved elsewhere, and it did not return. The system continued to perform, just not on the axis that now mattered most. This condition was stable. And it was permanent, not destruction, but displacement. Venice had optimized itself for a specific kind of world, a world where controlling routes mattered more than discovering new ones, where coordination beat experimentation, where stability created advantage. For centuries, that alignment produced exceptional results. Then the world changed. Venice did not become incompetent. It remained excellent, just at something that no longer defined leadership. Its predictability helped others plan around it. Its caution slowed capital reallocation. Its institutions preserved order, not transformation. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. It simply kept doing it after the payoff had passed. That is not failure, it is mistimed success. By the time alternatives became clear, Venice faced a closed set of options. Opening politics threatened legitimacy. Abandoning roots threatened entrenched wealth. Centralizing authority threatened stability. There was no painless path forward. Every serious adjustment required dismantling the mechanisms that held the system together, and delay was not neutral. Each year of preservation deepened lock-in. Capital, law, governance, and identity had aligned around continuity, and systems rarely dismantle themselves voluntarily. Venice was not trapped by ignorance, it was trapped by coherence. Venice did not fail to see change. It failed to remain necessary. Trade continued, but no longer needed to pass through Venetian coordination. Decisions were made elsewhere. Routes bypassed familiar hubs. The world functioned without routing through Venice. The city remained rich enough to endure, but not flexible enough to lead. Venice became optional. This was not moral decline, not cultural decay, not administrative incompetence. It was a systemic outcome. When wealth is built on reducing uncertainty, it becomes dependent on the continuation of known conditions. When those conditions shift, wealth does not vanish, it hardens. And hardened systems survive precisely long enough to be left behind. Venice solved the problem of stability better than almost any society in history, and in doing so, it made adaptability increasingly expensive. The same incentives that produced order suppressed reinvention. The same institutions that protected wealth resisted transformation. The same success that made Venice rich made change structurally unattractive. This is the central contradiction. Systems that feel permanent are often the least prepared for a world that no longer needs them. If this way of understanding history feels intuitive to you, seeing power as incentives, systems, and constraints rather than heroes and collapses, this channel is built around that lens. History does not punish societies for success. It reveals the limits of success built around the wrong constraints. Venice shows us that wealth is not just accumulation, it is alignment. When incentives, institutions, and expectations become too perfectly matched to the past, even the most sophisticated systems can become irrelevant without ever truly failing.